Your Creative Push, episode 297.
Everything is magic. Why isn't it like that for us as adults? Where do we lose that magical sense, and how can we get it back again?
Welcome to Your Creative Push, the podcast that pushes you to pursue your creative passions. I'm your host, Youngman Brown, and my guest today is Cassie Stephens. Cassie is an elementary school art teacher in Nashville, Tennessee, who spends a lot of her free time sewing wacky outfits to accompany art lessons, thrift shopping, and just making stuff, and she makes a ton of stuff. She has a blog, a podcast, YouTube videos. She is all over the place, sharing the ways in which she combines her art with teaching of art and to help others do the same. And Cassie comes on the show today to talk about her creative journey and to share how she went from a comfortable identity as the weird artsy girl in high school to an uncomfortable, self-conscious lack of identity in college and how she got past that. She talks about the difference in mentality between her fine art classes and her art education classes and classmates, and the biggest lie she was ever told and how it stayed with her for years. Cassie also shares with us a story of how she put so much effort into teaching art that she let go of creating for herself for 7 years, and the ways that she got back to her personal creative side and the ways that she still tries to align her DIY creative side with her teaching side. She also shares with us how she finds the time to get to all of her creative passions and also her creative obligations. And I got to tell you, it was one of my favorite answers to this age-old question. Cassie also shares with us the logic and emotion behind her decision to stop pursuing painting and why we should never create from a place of obligation or guilt, because the work will always reflect those emotions. And finally, she talks about why we lose our childlike excitement for creativity and how we can get it back. I had a fantastic conversation with Cassie, super inspiring stuff, and she is a living testament that you can combine all of your creative passions, and you can find ways to balance the scales so that you can feel completely fulfilled in all of the creative aspects of your life. So please sit back, relax, and enjoy my conversation with the one and only Cassie Stephens. Cassie, welcome to Your Creative Push.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for being on. I know you're a huge inspiration to a lot of art teachers out there, and also artists in general. So I'm very excited to have you on to kind of share your story, share your motivation, and get us inspired today.
Well, I'm thrilled to be here and excited to talk about it too, because it's been, like many other creative people, it's been a journey, and I've learned a lot along the way and still learning. So I'm excited to share with y'all today.
Yay! Well, let's start there then with your journey. Can you tell us kind of how you got to the point you are today in your career and creatively speaking?
Sure. It's a long and winding road. So
yay! We love the long and windy ones.
Hang with me a little bit.
Cool.
So my name is Cassie, and I'm currently an elementary art teacher in Nashville, Tennessee area. I actually teach in a town called Franklin, in case anybody's familiar with Tennessee. It's a great town. And I've been teaching art. This is actually going into my 20th year, which is kind of nuts to think about. And I've always taught kindergarten through 4th grade art. And that is not the place where, when I was in college, that I imagined that I would be. But I couldn't be more excited that I'm here. You know, when I was in elementary school, we actually didn't even have art classes at all, one of the reasons I love teaching art is because to elementary age kids is because I'm giving something to my students that I never had. And so I am sharing with them everything that I wish I would have learned at that age. And so for me to come up with projects and dream up things for them to do is really exciting. But when I was a kid, I loved creating. I just didn't have access to an outlet. But it's funny because every summer I think of this when I drive by churches and they're advertising their vacation Bible schools. I literally was like a vacation Bible school crazed kid. I didn't care what the denomination of the church was. If they had vacation Bible school, I knew there would be snacks and I knew there would be crafts. I mean, I hit up every single one of those churches during the summers growing up. And I just loved creating. When I got into high school, I finally had art and I felt like I really had found my place. I stopped trying so hard to fit in. I think we all grew through that phase. Probably for me, it was junior high, where you just so desperately want to be the cool kid. You want to fit in with the cheerleader / football crowd. And I tried, but it just never happened for me. And I quickly learned that I didn't want that anyway, that wasn't who I was. And I started going to the thrift stores and just kind of dressing a little bit different and really, I guess, coming into my own in high school. And I kind of became that weird artsy kid. And I loved being that weird artsy kid, especially in the middle of nowhere, Indiana. I stood out like a sore thumb and I loved it. When I went to college, though, my graduating class in high school was like 72 kids. It was a very small school. And then I went to Indiana University, which is, in case you don't know, the best college ever. And it's a wonderful place to go. But my freshman year, I just felt like swallowed whole. There's 30,000 kids on that campus. And I suddenly went from being this big fish in a little pond to being this tiny fish in a pond of all of these cool artsy kids who knew exactly who they were comfortable with themselves, and were way more, in my mind, artistic and creative than I was.
Art sharks.
Yes, exactly. And I just kind of really became a lot more self-conscious. I actually didn't take any art courses my freshman year, which I think was a huge problem because that was my outlet. So not only did I kind of lose myself, but I didn't have my creative outlet at that time. But I think it was my summer of my sophomore year, I took a oil painting class. And it was like, just like falling in love, it was like, oh my gosh, this is it. This is where everything is for me. And I just ate it up. Loved going to class, loved spending any and all of my free time painting. And that's when I decided I wanted to pursue a painting degree. Now, that all sounds well and good unless your parents happen to be footing the bill for college, which thank goodness, I'm so thrilled that I don't have to worry about that now. But they were like, honey, we're not paying for you to spend the next 2 years painting in a studio. I know that sounds like fun, but that's not, back then, $20,000 worth of fun that we plan on paying for. So they encouraged me to also get my ed degree. And teaching was never, ever anything I'd ever considered. We have teachers in my family, but my aunt was my English teacher for 2 years, actually, in high school. And it's just never anything that struck me. And I'm sure a lot of people find themselves maybe going down a career path where they're just like, how did I get here? What am I doing? Right. What is this? But I decided to pursue it simply because I didn't have a choice. And I remember starting to take the ed classes. I think I was probably my junior year in college. And the art of education building, actually it was in the education building, the art ed classes, was on the opposite end of the campus as the fine arts building. So I would in the mornings go to my painting class and then just truck it across campus to do my ed classes. And I just thought it was so weird at the time that here I am taking fine arts classes and then my fine arts ed classes are on the opposite end of the campus. Shouldn't they be housed in the same building? You're teaching teachers how to teach art. Shouldn't that happen in the art building? And it didn't. And in fact, those two entities could have been on the opposite ends of the universe because they were just so drastically different in mindset. When I would go to my painting classes, all of those kids were getting their major in art. And when I would pack up to go to my ed classes, I was really looked down upon. I was the kid who wasn't taking my art seriously enough because if I was, I would only be focused on painting, not also taking these ed classes. And when I would go to my ed classes, I was looked down upon there because here I was walking in with paint all over my clothes and not these beautifully perfected lessons that I was supposed to be writing. So that really struck a chord with me. I felt like I had to pick a team. I had to decide, did I want to be an artist or did I want to be an art teacher? Because I was really led to believe that I couldn't be both. And that really stayed with me for a long time.
And that's kind of the theme of one episode from your wonderful podcast, Everyday Art Room. The biggest lie that you were ever told. And I think that lie that you can't pursue both of those things applies to not only teachers, but to any kind of creative person that is kind of going down a path to make money. That smart path that maybe their parents put them down or that they put themselves down, that smart thing that they have to do in order to put food on the table. And this whole idea of being this creative person that does something that they enjoy, like from childhood, is this kind of far off, distant thing of the past, something that you can't also pursue, whether it's for money or just for pleasure. I think that's one of the most detrimental lies that we are told and that we do tell ourselves,
For sure. I mean, and that lie hung with me forever. I mean, for a very, very long time. I mean, when I graduated from college and I did my student teaching and it was time for me to get a job, I landed a job. I'm from Indiana, but I got a job in Nashville. And I didn't have any ties at the time. I wasn't married. I didn't have children. So I was game to move wherever. So I moved to Nashville, and I remember walking into my my classroom, which was when I went in for the interview, the principal had called it a portable. He kept referring to my new art room as, it's a really nice portable. We just got it installed. It's right out back. It's really nice. Do you want to take a look at it? And I was like, I don't understand what a portable is.
Is it a porta potty? Is
right.
it like?
I'd never heard that verbiage before. I was like, he was really talking it up. And I was like, look, I think these people are going to hire me. I'm just going to say yes. No, I'm good. I don't need to see this portable. I remember that first day walking out to it and I was like, this is a trailer. Where I'm from, we straight up call these trailers. This is not a whatever. But anyway, I remember walking into that portable and just thinking, like a slap in the face, like, oh my gosh, in less than 5 days, I'm going to have children in here that I'm going to have to teach art. Like, I'm responsible for introducing them to this thing that I absolutely love. And it was then that I realized that I needed to get my act together and fast. And so all of my focus, like laser focus, became on figuring out how to teach art. Because to be honest, when I was in college, my main pursuit was painting. And I would go to those ed classes with my painting professors and my buddies in my mind, like, you're not going to do this. You're just getting this degree for your parents. You don't have to pay attention. And unfortunately, I was probably the worst art ed student ever, which is hilarious now that I have like a podcast and a blog all about teaching art. And here I was like the worst kid. So I just made it my like 24/7 focus to figure out how to teach art and to do the best job that I possibly could. And that focus, I feel like I didn't let up on that until maybe my 7th year of teaching. I would spend every summer. Gradually, I graduated up from a portable to an actual classroom. And I would spend every summer just in my room, decorating, reading every book on classroom discipline and teaching that I could get my hands on. This was back in like the early 2000s where there weren't a lot of blogs. I don't remember there being any blogs about teaching art. So anything I could get my hands on was like gold for me. And because I spent so much of my time figuring out how to teach art and trying to do the best job that I could, I completely let go of the idea of creating. I just thought, you know what? I'm having to pick a side. And right now, the side that I'm picking is teaching art. This is the job that's I'm getting paid to do. And a lot of kids' art education is relied on me. And it's unfortunate that I did that because when you stop creating and you're teaching people how to be creative, you start to grow really bitter. And I know that at least that's what happened to me. I really felt burnt out it was probably about my 7th year teaching. And I just thought, I cannot keep doing this. This is just too much. And I really felt like, I like to liken it to having like a vitamin deficiency. When you're a creative person and you're not creating, then something feels off, something feels wrong. And I think it's because you're not taking your creative vitamins. You're not feeding that part of yourself that you know as a creative person, you have to keep feeding. So I actually spent, because I knew something wasn't right, I decided to go to a therapist and talked it out with him. And what I learned through that was that even if you're not, quote, depressed by everybody else's standards, you appear to be a happy person. But if you yourself deep inside feel like something's not right, why not talk to somebody about it? And in light of things like Kate Spade and Anthony Bourdain, I think that it's really important to realize that just because to the outside world your life looks as though it's one way, it doesn't mean that it is, and it's okay to accept that. And what I learned from talking to my therapist was that I need to start creating again, that was the missing piece. And so I did.
I think that vitamin thing is so true. And in my about 3 years of creating this podcast, actually, about the whole creative process and stuff, I've had like 2 spats of that where I felt both burnout and also feeling like a huge phony because I hadn't like written anything significant for months, or even at one point, like it was over a year.
Wow.
And especially when you're talking to creative people about the creative process and like obviously that's the whole thesis of this podcast, you feel like a phony when you're not being a creative person. So I imagine It's exactly the same when you're trying to teach, especially young kids, about like why art is so amazing, and you're like, yeah, but I'm not
what
doing
do you
it myself.
make,
Yeah, right.
What do you like to paint, Miss Stevens? What do you like to do? And I would just be like, I like to teach you guys.
And sleep.
Right. So one way I decided to start kind of pursuing my creative side was, I just kind of started fiddling around. I taught myself how to sew. I started by sewing a couple of aprons just for fun. And I really got into making ceramic belt buckles and sewing belts. And I decided to open an Etsy shop. And I really loved doing that. I loved the process of creating. I loved the thrill of having somebody buy something that I had made and taking the time to wrap it up, to package it beautifully, and to send it off with them, a treasure that I'd created that they also are going to cherish. That was just such a thrill for me. The problem, though, that I found was that in pursuing that, I pretty much stopped focusing on teaching. My lessons were starting to become stagnant. I was repeating projects. I would sometimes do the same project with 1 to 2 grade levels, or maybe even 3, meaning all of them were going to do landscapes because that meant less planning for me and more time for me to pursue my creative, avenue. But again, I, after a while of doing that I think I did for maybe 8 months, I started to feel really guilty. I felt like it was like a scale. Creativity was on one side, or I guess teaching art was on one side, and the artist in me was on the other. Once again, I had that notion that I had to pick a team. And at the time I felt like, well, I'm right now picking the artist side of the team. And I wasn't allowing myself to do a good job with teaching art because my focus was so much on creating. And in knowing that, I realized that I had to stop picking one or the other. I had to find a way to somehow do both, pursue both, because that was what was going to be fair to my students, and that was what was going to be fair to the artist in me. So I decided that if I started a blog just for me, that on this blog, I was going to have 3 main points. I was going to once a week blog about an original lesson idea that I created for my students, something fun, something unusual that we were doing in my art room. Once a week, I was also going to share something I had created. And then once a week, I was going to share what weird clothing I had worn that week. And in fact, the whole, for a while, I think even to this day, people think my blog is titled What the Art Teacher Wore, just because that was like the premise. The main premise of my blog was once a week, I would share what crazy outfit I'd worn to teach in, which also tapped into my love for in high school, finding funky clothing at the thrift store and wearing it, because I'd also lost that along the way. So what I was trying to do is bring together the artist and art teacher, and then also my kind of love for just being wild and wacky in what I wear.
But the outfits also served a purpose too, right?
Right. So eventually that's when I started to tie in fashion with teaching. So I don't paint anymore. It's not something that I'm any longer passionate about as much as I was in college. But what I do love to do is create clothing, and I love to sew. I love to needle felt clothing. Needle felting is when you take a very sharp serrated tool. It looks like a very long needle.
And you stab someone with it.
Yes, pretty much. If
Nice.
you don't watch yours, I'm laughing because on my finger right now, I have a great big gash where I wasn't paying attention. Apparently, you're not supposed to drink wine and needle felt. You're not supposed to use sharp tools and stab things while drinking. So
It can help though.
I can't help. It always looks so much better despite the bloodshed. So that's, one other fashion avenue that I love to pursue. And I started to think obviously I'm a visual person, and I have to put everything in like a visual mindset. So for me, I like to think of planning lessons and creating anything, fashion, a painting for my classroom, whatever, a DIY, we'll call it. I like to think of those as two roads heading toward a goal. And if I can align my teaching road with my DIY creative road, if I can have them running parallel, meaning if I'm going to teach my kids about Vincent van Gogh, then I'm also going to be on my creative time needle felting a Starry Night dress. If I'm working on both my artist side and my teaching side, and both roads are running parallel going toward the same end goal, I reach that goal a lot faster. I'm a lot more successful, and I've ticked both my boxes of artist pursuits and art teacher pursuits. But when I'm thinking of a lesson, but then on the creative side, I'm doing something totally divergent, a road that runs completely parallel, I feel like one of those goals isn't reached. And if I do reach a goal, it's because I didn't pursue my teaching side as well, or my creative side as well. So whenever I start planning a lesson, I like to think of what I can be creative on my end to either wear or bring into my room to share with my students. And so that's kind of how I've got past that whole, you have to pick a team. If I can have both teams working together, I feel like that's what works really well for me.
Right. And I think that that's something that a lot of people struggle with, is that scale and figuring out how to balance the scale. And I think when the scale starts to get too heavily weighted in one thing, sometimes it can feel overwhelming and depressing, and you feel like something's off. So my encouragement to people would be, when things start to feel off, see that as like an opportunity. Your heart, or your soul, or whatever is telling you that you're not getting the correct balance, and it's just a time to start to pursue the other, like to find ways to put weight into the other end of that scale, and then it might get too heavily weighted the other way, and like see that as an opportunity to keep figuring it out. But I think you nailed it. You found a beautiful way of kind of incorporating both. So trying to find a way to merge those two things, whatever those pursuits may be, is the key. Hard thing to do, but definitely the key.
Yeah. And I think a part of that is also just being really in tune with yourself and listening to yourself. I think a lot of times we have thoughts that maybe scare us, like, oh, I'm not creating. And we know that that's there. We know that thought is there. We know that there's something missing, and yet we'll tune it out or we'll push it aside, and we don't want to deal with those thoughts. And I think that it's important to really stop and listen to your gut, and just know, okay, something's off here. I'm missing something. How can I carve out some time to really pursue my creative passions because this is something that's vital for me. And I think that's so important.
Right. And then how kind should you be to yourself? And then how mean should you be to yourself whenever you kind of feel that, I'm too busy doing one thing or the other. And you know that you have those excuses that I'm too busy to do this. I have too much on my plate. How much self-love should you have?
I think that, everybody says time. I don't have time. That's everybody's, excuse. And a lot of times that's a legitimate excuse. We're all really busy. And I get asked a lot about time because from the outside appearance, when I share things on my blog or Instagram, I think it looks as though I'm getting all sorts of things done, like I'm some sort of magical time bender. And I'm actually an epic waster of time. My mom saved all of my report cards from when I was a kid. And the other day I found them in the garage. And I pulled out my second grade report card and my teacher had written, Mrs. Cheek had written, Cassie is a poor manager of time. And I am still an epic poor manager of time, but somehow I force myself to find time and to make time. And my husband is the exact opposite of me. He's very analytical, meticulous, detail-oriented, and very wise with his time. And recently he told me that he felt like he was wasting a lot of his time, losing a lot of it, and couldn't figure out where it was going. So he started keeping kind of like a 30-minute journal all day long of what he had done. I spent X amount of time on emails. I spent X amount of time, going to the work kitchen to heat up my tea. I did this, I did that. And he said in retrospect, when he looked at where his time went, he realized he was checking his email multiple times, too many times a day, getting on social media, just whittling away time. I feel like that is an epic time suck for all of us, is social media. So if you start really becoming aware of where your time is going and where you should be putting your time, I think that you'll magically find that you have more of it. Art teachers often ask me, how do I find the time? And, what magical elixir do I have? My magical elixir is coffee, personally.
Yes.
But I also don't have cable. That's just, we don't have a functioning television. So getting rid of that already eliminates a big waste of time. I don't keep my house up. So I would recommend giving up cleaning. And if you give up cleaning, you have all sorts of time. It's not ideal, but it works. And I also personally, I don't have children. So I speak from a place where I don't have a small human obligation or humans. And that also gives me a lot of time. But I think that if you really become aware of where your time is going and push it to more of the top of your priority list, if you stop thinking of it as a hobby, but more of it as something that you need to do, and let your family know, I'm not just going out to the garage to whittle or whatever because I like it. I'm doing it because I need to do it for me to be a better parent or father or person in this family. I have to do this for myself. So if you think of it as more of like a food, water, creating kind of situation, I think that your family will come to understand it and you'll magically find that you have time to do it. And you're going to love that you made sure to find time to do it.
Yeah, I think in this life that we all live, very often we feel like we need to do stuff for other people. We need to keep the house clean, or we need to keep up with this TV show so that we can talk to our friends about it, or go out to the, everything that we're invited to, or else we're a bad friend or a family member. But I think what your husband did is perfect. I always encourage people to do that too, and to be really honest when you're doing an exercise like that, like tracking what you're doing for a week or so, to visualize and see how much time is getting sucked into some of these different things, and then just list them out and really start crossing things off. Like, do you need to watch that TV show? That was the big thing for me. I always talk about that, is like TV was like half of my free time. You know what I mean? And it almost felt like a responsibility to keep up with all the shows, and like almost a stressful thing, even though TV shows are awesome these days.
Yeah, they are. They are.
But it's finding those things. And then also, like you said, realizing that it's for you. Like, this time is that you're spending to get to your creative passion or to exercise or whatever it may be, self-improvement is for you to make you a better person so that the rest of your time is so much more enjoyable and so that you can finally give the best version of yourself to other people or to your students.
Agreed. Yes. What you're doing is it's only fair that you do it to the people around you so that you don't start to resent them or resent your job or resent the situation, that you find yourself in. You'll be a happier person because of it. And that's a gift that you're going to give the people around you, that happiness.
For sure. But sometimes like crossing things off can be difficult. And I actually wanted to specifically ask you about painting. When you kind of crossed that off of your list, what was that discovery and then decision to do that? Like what went behind that? And then what were the like kind of emotions involved with that?
To stop pursuing painting?
Yeah.
Well, I think that painting for me, when I initially took that painting class in college, painting for me was a way to work through some things because my paintings were very raw. There was a lot of revealing who I was and what I was thinking about in my paintings. And so for me, it was almost like canvas therapy. And I really loved it. When I got accepted into the painting program, it became a lot more, it became less about me and more about pursuing technique and looking at other artists and trying to emulate that style and getting approval of professors. And that's a shame. I don't think that's the fault of my professors. I think that's my fault in trying to please, being the pleaser that I am, wanting my professors to be proud of me and not necessarily focusing so much on what am I trying to say. So having lost kind of that voice when I was in the painting program, when I got out of college, it was twofold. There was one part of me that said, well, if you're teaching now and you're not painting 24/7, if this is not on your mind all the time, if you aren't eating, breathing, and living painting, which was kind of what was, I felt like what was put on us in the painting course that I was in. If you're not doing that, then you might as well just not do it at all. And so I had that mindset that it's either all or nothing. And I sadly gave that up. And I also just, because I was painting through emotions and painting my thoughts, it became from a really heavy kind of place. It wasn't light. It wasn't enjoyable. It was kind of dark and it was a little intense. And if you're going to paint from that kind of place, you really do need to spend a lot of time thinking about it, working on it. You can't come home from work and, paint for a little, like 30 minutes and be like, okay, I'm good. So for me, I had this tortured artist mindset, that I had to come home and really like drag it out and, spend a lot of time mixing the colors and setting the tone for this canvas. It wasn't an enjoyable experience, and my paintings were definitely not enjoyable to look at. So for that reason, I think that I wanted to move to a happier place in my mind and painting for me, because I had spent so much time kind of wallowing in that kind of way of painting. It wasn't a joyful thing. When I do paint now, because I love to paint paintings for our house, it's always a lot more colorful. They're bright. They're not narrative paintings like what I used to do. And they make me happy because I love just to look at them, and I do them just for me. They're not for anybody else to come in and critique or say that I need to change and rework. So it's unfortunate. I think that I spent so much time, I guess, letting my professors in my head and losing track of who I was and why I loved painting. I think that I maybe would paint now, but the unfortunate thing would be maybe I wouldn't create clothing like I do. One thing that I have learned is that needle felting, which is, like I mentioned before, it's using wool roving, and you can create images and pictures that way. For me, that's kind of become painting. You're essentially painting with fibers. You can get really impressionistic with it. You can get really graphic with it. And I feel like that has kind of replaced painting for me, because in my mind, that's what I liken it to. And so I feel like in a way I still am painting, but with a different medium. And maybe I'll get back to painting, but it's not something that I miss. I don't miss those kind of tortured artist days from college. So it's not something that I used to regret it a lot. And now I no longer do. And painting or creating from a place of regret or a place of guilt, that's never a good place to be working from. That's never going to be a place where you're happy. And I guarantee you're never going to stick it out for very long. You know what I'm saying?
100%.
If you're doing something because you feel obligated to do it, or this is what I'm supposed to do, you're never going to stick it out. And your work is going to reflect that kind of tortured and not in a good way kind of artist. So I, like I said, I used to really beat myself up. I used to think I should go get my master's in painting as all my college buddies did. And I just thought to myself, why? Why? If you're going to paint, just paint. If you're going to create, just create. Do you really have to shell out a bunch of money to have your painting professors beat you up 24/7? No. Right. So that's where I am, I guess, with that now.
Right. And I think that comes down to like why people don't want to start like pick up something new, something that they've never tried before, is that like this like progress bars of, different kind of creative passions. And for a lot of people, a lot of them are at 0%. And, I don't think anybody ever gets to 100%, but if you're already at like a 60% in painting, why start something new at 0% when, you've already put all this time previously and have developed skills in doing this thing. It feels like, this is like a task that you need to continue to pursue, but it feels like just that, a task.
Exactly.
But the great thing is that a 0% thing, that's where you get the fun. Like it's so much fun to kind of play in the sand, you know what I mean? And
Agreed.
There's not as much pressure as long as you can kind of dive in and find a good resource or a good teacher. There's nobody watching, and you can feel like a kid when you get into a new thing like clay or fiber art or music, a musical instrument, whatever it may be,
Agreed. 100%. One of my favorite sayings is ignorance is bliss. And when it comes to like learning how to create with something for the first time, it is so joyful because for me with needle felting, it's not something that a lot of people are doing right now. So there's no rules. With painting, I just felt like there were so many rules. And that was just part of me listening too much to my painting professors. But like you said, when you discover something and you've never tried it before, it's like no rules and you can just go for it. And like a kid playing in the sand, like you mentioned, it's just so much fun. And I feel like that's what creating needs to be for us all the time. And, sharing as we do like on social media and getting criticisms and feeling a little nitpicked. Sometimes you just got to like, ice that out. Don't even listen to it and just kind of go with the fun of something. And me teaching kids and watching them get excited. I mean, I'll literally see them clap their hands and give themselves a round of applause when they figure out how to use red and yellow to make orange. And it's just everything is magic. Why isn't it like that for us as adults? Where do we lose that magical sense and how can we get it back again? And it's a big part of it is just by ignoring the negativity and just finding joy in the creative process. Not, is this going to be beautiful enough for me to share on Instagram and how many likes am I going to get kind of thing,
Yeah, that whole likes and followers and all those metrics seem to kind of rule our brains when we're actually in the creative process. But that's the thing that you need to get out of your head when you're in that sandbox.
Oh, great. That's a whole nother podcast.
Yeah, for sure. We'll get into that next time, maybe. Well, and the other good thing about doing something like fiber art, like you're saying, where, there's not a lot of people doing it, there's less rules, but there's also less people to compare yourself to, which I think is another big downfall of creative people, is all of these wonderful artists that are out there sharing their absolute perfect work.
Right.
And then you compare yourself to that, and that is just a recipe for disaster.
Agreed. Yes.
Well, before we let you go, I was hoping that you could give us the final push and a final push that's specifically aimed towards teachers. My sister, she's an art teacher, and you completely inspired her as well to have that kind of aha moment where, you taught her that, it's okay to pursue your own creative passions as well. It's okay to get back to that, your own side projects, your paintings, or she just illustrated. We created a children's book together, which we'll be talking about later in the series of podcasts. But so I was hoping maybe you could take this opportunity to inspire any teachers out there that perhaps have kind of lost their own creative mojo and have been concentrating too much on, their lesson plans and their kids.
Of course. Well, I just read a really great quote, and it said, there are going to be some people who don't get you, and those are not your people. And I think a lot of us, we focus so much on what other people are saying, what other people are telling us to do. And really, like I said, giving yourself time to sit and listen to your voice, even if it means finding somebody like a therapist to talk to about it, especially if you feel like you've lost your voice. You don't know who this person is inside of you anymore because you've spent so much time trying to please others or pursue your career, and you've lost track of your kind of creative side. Finding out who that person is and then being okay with that person. In fact, being so okay with that person that you love that person and you can't wait to share that person with the world with your creative outlet. And I think that you're going to hear naysayers and you're going to hear a lot of self-doubt and negative talk even from yourself, and pushing all of that aside and knowing that you are on the correct path because you're really listening to yourself, that's vital. So I think you be you and you doing you is probably the best advice that I could offer, and hope that it resonates with folks out there.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. Thank you so much for coming on the show today, for inspiring us and sharing your story. I really do appreciate it.
It's been so much fun. Thank you for having me. Yeah.
You're welcome. And for everybody out there, you can find Cassie on her blog, cassiestephens.blogspot.com. You can also head to today's show notes page at yourcreativepush.com/297, where we'll have everything linked up, where you can find her on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and her podcast, Everyday Art Room. Highly recommend you listen to that, whether you're a teacher or not. If you listen to this podcast, you will love that one as well. Cassie, thanks again.
Thank you so much.
Oh, man, my thanks once again to Cassie for coming on the show. I just want to take us back to that very important visualization that Cassie gave us of her art education class on the other side of campus from her fine art classes, and how appropriate that is for a lot of our mindsets because of the way that we are taught from our teachers and guided by our parents, and just the general narrative that our society seems to be going down. And I don't blame anybody for thinking this way, but it truly is as easy as simply starting to do the thing that you want to do while you're not on the job. That thing that you feel unfulfilled about, that thing that you know you should be getting to, or you're not getting to enough, or you're coming up with tons of excuses as to why this thing is on the back burner. You get to do that thing. It's that simple. You just need to find the time, and you just need to start doing it and forget about all of those other narratives that other people or yourself are telling yourself. Just start down that path, and you can course correct as things start to get unbalanced. You can find ways to make that scale balance, but if you're not putting any weight into the other end of the scale, that thing that you want to get to in your free time, you're just going to continue to get weighted down, and it's going to be harder and harder to make that scale balance. And Cassie is the perfect, beautiful example of how to merge those two things. Find ways to make those two things work in tandem, so you're getting to both things at once. It's a hard thing to do, and it's going to take practice, and it's going to take, as I said, course correction and experimentation. But once you can find a way to make that scale balance, you'll not only be getting to both of those things and fulfilling both desires or obligations, but you'll be making beautiful stuff because it will be coming out of a more fulfilled and more happy creative person. On our next episode, we have Kosha Kuna. Kosha is an artist, teacher, and co-founder of Sketchbook School. and she is co-founders of Sketchbook School with Danny Gregory, who was recently on the show for a killer episode, and she comes on to knock it out of the park as well. And amongst other things, she talks about how she was an award-winning photographer, but realized that it was her passion for drawing and painting that became her lifelong mission. If you want to find out more about Kosha, you can head to her website at koshakuna.com. That's KOOSJEKOENE.com. Or, of course, you can find her at sketchbook.school. Or we'll have all of that linked up at today's show notes page, along with everything we talked about with Cassie at yourcreativepush.com/297. But that is all I've got for you today, so hopefully you were inspired to go and get to your creative passions. So go and get your work done. Go find a way to balance those scales. Stop making excuses and start becoming a creative machine. And also join us for our morning motivation week that we talked about last week with Alatar, where we wake up early and get to our creative passions and tell each other about it and keep each other accountable. That starts today, Monday, July 16th, and it runs until August 15th. It's a low-pressure, highly supportive way for you to keep that motivation to make your days much more creative. You can join us on either Discord, yourcreativepush.com/Discord for the invite link, or on Facebook. We have already started a thread, and you can get there directly at yourcreativepush.com/wakeup. So good luck to anybody that is joining us for that. But otherwise, we will see you next week if you need the push again. I love you all, and we'll see you next time. Bye. Never miss a push. Head to yourcreativepush.com/subscribe to find the easiest way for you to subscribe to the podcast.